Hello, I'm Brad Mead. I'm the Scoutmaster for Troop 175 in Simsbury, Connecticut, and this is a podcast about how to plan an international trip for your Boy Scout troop. When I was a Boy Scout, I was fortunate enough to have a great troop, and we did a lot of national type of travel trips. But when I got out of college, I started traveling around the world, and I got to meet a lot of explorers and a lot of adventurers, and eventually put close to 145 countries in my passport. And in the process, I learned a lot about international travel and would eventually take our sons and our daughter and my wife on international trips, and we'd take backpacks and go for 3 weeks into third world countries. When I became a Scoutmaster for our troop in 2006, I said, you know, this might be something that we should do for a Scout troop. And we set up our first goal, and our first trip was to climb Kilimanjaro in 2007. And we took about 20 people up that trip, and we made it all the way to the top. Most of them made it to the top. Since then, we've gone into the Amazon, we've gone rafting down the Zambezi River, we've gone sailing through the Greek islands, through the islands of Thailand, through most of the Caribbean. We have had the opportunity to go to Alaska on 3 different trips. And so this is a podcast about how to set these up, the trips we've gone on, the logistics of how we put it together, and the costs. It's something that is a lot easier to do than most people know, and it becomes the thing that your scouts remember the most about their scouting career. So our first trip that we decided to undertake in 2007 was a climb up Kilimanjaro. Kilimanjaro is the tallest mountain in Tanzania. It had been a trip I had planned for my family, and we found that a lot of the older boys and members of our scout troop were interested in going, and so we set it up. We flew to Nairobi. We then took a bus, private bus, into Tanzania, and we found ourselves at the Morongo Hotel, which is the largest climbing and oldest climbing service in Tanzania. As we were walking around in the neighborhood, we ran into another scout troop. Scout troop was sponsored by an orphanage, and so we naturally greeted them. And later on, one of our boys, this guy, Carter Hill, would go back to Tanzania to do his Eagle project with that orphanage. So already we were seeing benefits out of going on a trip like this. The trip starts, and we went up the dry side of the mountains, and we were going up through the backside of Mwenzi Mountain. You're only carrying a day pack. It's not very hard. Your guides and your porters are taking most of the heavy stuff. And eventually you get up to this high plateau. You can see it's getting pretty cold. We're doing this in end of July, but we're on the equator, and temperature is a function of how high you are. And we're now getting up to 14,000 feet. We get up eventually to the climbing hut, and at the climbing hut we're going to go ahead and get up at 11 o'clock at night, put on all our gear, and we're going to prepare for what is an 18-hour day. We start climbing at midnight with your headlamps, and the temperature is about 15 degrees at that point. And we had a crystal clear sky, and we start moving up what is really a large volcanic crater, very, very slowly. Eventually, the sun comes up. It's a pretty tough climb. It takes a lot out of you. And eventually we get up to Gilman's Point, which is the first summit. This is the lowest point of the crater, and you can see in this picture all the way in the distance is the highest point of the crater. But just at about sunrise, we reach the crater. It is a travel around to the side. We're now getting to the top, and eventually we get to 19,320 feet at the top of Kilimanjaro. We'll hold up the flag. Temperature is now minus 15. The oxygen level is about 30% of sea level. We got almost everybody up there, and the actual trip itself was about 4.5 days up, 1.5 days down. We had 24 climbers, 76 support staff, so we had over 100 people on the mountain. 20 made it to the crater ridge, 14 made it all the way to the summit. And at the final part of the summit, it was minus 15 degrees. It was about 25 knots of wind. It was cold. Then after that, we came back down and we did something really fun. We went on a safari for about 7 days. The safari was a private safari. We said we had enough people that we could do it just on our own. We visited a lot of the Maasai villages. We're able to get involved with the local people. We stayed in some really nice hotels. This was not camping any longer. We were staying at some of the nicest hotels, staying on the top, all part of the deal. And we got to see all the wildlife. And that's overlooking Ngorongoro Crater, which is a very famous place. And we got to negotiate souvenirs with the Maasai tribes. The boys had great fun. They got to ride up on top of the cars and see all the wild animals through the parks. The monkeys would come right up close, the lions and the elephants. So it was a great trip. The total cost of the trip was a flight to Nairobi was about $1,600. Then the climb and the safari, and the total cost was about $5,100. We did this trip again in 2012, and we did it just last summer in 2019. And the trip price was, again, about the same. What has happened is air flights have gone down, climbing costs have gone up, safari costs have gone up, and when you meet it all out, it's still able to be do it. We did this last summer for about $5,300 a person. The expedition contact there is the morangohotel.com. They take care of everything. It's run by some Scottish family. They're not Tanzanian, but they've been there forever, and it's the second generation that now runs it. 2 brothers and a sister, and they just do a phenomenal job. And they've become, frankly, pretty good friends over the years. Later on, I will give you the flight information for we always charter flights when we do this, which means we buy charter space on scheduled airline flights. And I have a charter operator, a group charter operator down in Florida that handles all that, and it makes it incredibly easy because you can reserve 25 or 30 seats for $100 a seat, and it's all refundable up until 90 days before you go. And if you decide you need to release seats, you can do it right up until you ticket, which is about 45 days before you go. And so that means you don't have to lay out a lot of money for all the costs. The hotel, the Morongo Hotel, takes very little money up front, and you pay the rest of it when you get there. So cash flow is an important part of doing these types of things. But I can tell you on the last 2 trips, we were sold out. And this last summer, we had a total of 28 people that went on the trip. Next summer, 2007, we went deep into the Amazon jungle. The Amazon's a place I've spent a lot of time on a variety of expeditions. It's a really fascinating place, but it's hard on people. We flew into Lima, Peru, and then we took a motor launch 50 miles up the Amazon to the Tahayo River, and then we went further on up into the Amazon Research Center, which is in a very remote area. Never visited, in a remote area that's being mapped and cataloged by the research scientists there. I was heavily involved with Dr. Paul Beaver at a previous time in my life. He's the Indiana Jones of South America, and I'd call them up and I said, I got some scouts who want to do an adventure. What do you got? And he said, I'm looking for a red monkey that hasn't been seen in 25 years. Do you guys want to come help me find it? And we said, you bet. So we flew to Lima, Peru, and then to Iquitos. This is a picture of Iquitos. It's the largest inland city that you can't get to by road in the world. It's full of a lot of slums and different poor areas, but it's a fascinating city. From there we got on boats, and we went a couple of 100 miles up the Amazon River and various tributaries, and eventually we ended up at a lodge called the Tahania Lodge. And when it rains like crazy, which is why they're up on stilts. We had lots of friends visit us from the jungle. This is a tarantula. We got to be real good with tarantulas. They crawl up your arm, and as long as you don't scare them, they're nice. We found ourselves in the forest with wild pigs that would come around, so we all made sure that we had pig pokers in order to keep them away. Obviously, there are a lot of alligators and things in the river there. Truth to say, it's kind of a miserable experience going through the Amazon. It's very humid, it's very hot, and everything in the jungle wants to hurt you. This is a picture that was taken kind of midday as we're going through the jungle. You see everybody soaked, both from sweat and from just everything else. But at the end of the day, you got to jump in the river. Don't stay too long because the piranha will come up and nibble on you. And but also back at the lodge, we had some friends that were parrots. And this is one of our scouts and my daughter feigning surprise. And this is a picture taken at high noon. You can see darkest South America, darkest jungle is really dark. And we're sloshing through in full boots and again being very wet. Here is a picture of one of our ASMs. If you look carefully, you can see him. He's maneuvering through the weeds. This is one of my sons going up into the canopy using Jumars. We spent a lot of time up in the canopy looking for the red monkey that we were trying to find. Eventually the monkey found us, and we were able to document it, and it was pretty mad that we were in his jungle and would throw things out of the canopy at us. This is where we would set up camp. These are our guides. They would clear a camp area and set it up, and we'd cook over fires. This is the whole group that we took into the jungle. It's not a place for makeup. It's a really tough place to go. Airfare from Lima was about $1,100. Then to Iquitos, about $260. These are all round trip. Jungle cost was about $1,400. 2-week total cost about $2,760. We've also done a number of trips to Alaska. Alaska is a fun place to go because you can fly into Anchorage and you can rent RVs. And you can rent them right there next to the airport. It's pretty cheap. Our Alaskan expeditions are typically about 3,000 miles in 15 days. We'll get as many as 8 RVs. We'll go mountain climbing, rafting, gold panning, salmon fishing, kayaking, halibut fishing, glacier climbing, all sorts of things. It's a wonderful spot. Alaskan Holidays RV in Anchorage is the go-to place to get your RV. We took a fairly sizable group and we went into large parts of the Klondike. You can see this is our wagon train every morning that we get going. We climb up into the mountains. Some of the best mountain climbing in the world is in Alaska. This is a group of our older scouts that climbed up. The guy in the middle there is Keegan Rice. If you remember watching Are You Tougher Than a Boy Scout, that famous show, he was Yeti in the show. He had long hair in the show and was one of the producer's favorites. This was some years before he did that. This is Keegan again. And we would go out into the bays and go kayaking. Obviously fishing is fabulous there. You throw in your fishing rod and you can pull out trout all day long, or rather salmon all day long. Sun doesn't set very often, especially in the summer. This is a picture at midnight. We did a lot of rafting, and so we came down what's called the 6 Mile River, which is one of the top class 4 rivers in the country, and had a lot of fun doing that. And again, this is about 11 o'clock at night. We'd sit by the lake or the sea or the ocean, and we'd cook up salmon and marshmallows. We'd have a lot of potluck suppers where everybody cook something in their RV and then bring it out to the communal table. And we got to go into Diamond Tooth Gertie's gambling hall. It's a tourist attraction, but it's a lot of fun. These are the old mines. And we went halibut fishing. Total cost for an Alaskan trip is pretty cheap. Per person, it's under $2,000 and less than you'd pay to do Philmont. And it's a great time. And what's great is that you have everybody in your base camp, which is your RV, and you go out every day. We get up typically at 4 or 5 in the morning, a lot of the drivers, because it's so light up, and they'd start driving. We drive 3 or 4 hours to the next place that we were going to be. Everybody else can sleep, and we would find our adventure for the day. We've also done some things closer in. Algonquin National Park is about an 8-hour drive from Connecticut, and it's up in Canada, but it's a great place. We do a day drive up, 3 days canoeing, and a day drive back, and you can rent canoes, paddles, and jackets and racks, everything right there, and the Barren River Canyon, which is a fabulous place. It has a lot of portages involved, sometimes as short as 100 feet and up to one mile or more. But the scenery is spectacular, and I think in the 3 days that we were on it, I don't think we ran into more than 2 people. We would cook up our meals. There we are portaging. That's one of our scout moms, portaging a canoe by herself. And you can see that we're just moving down through the rapids. A lot of fun spots to stop and play with the river. And every night we'd be at a different campsite, and we had some pretty good sun. Again, that's a really cheap trip. Worked out to about $175 a person, all the way up and back. And that's a great trip, and you can do it without getting on an airplane. We also do a lot of sailing in our troop. That sailing is really, we've done it all over the world. We've started out in the British Virgin Islands, and we'd fly from Newark to St. Thomas, and then fast ferry from St. Thomas to Tortola, and then we chartered down there with TMM, which is a very fine chartering service in Roatan, and we'd get 42-foot catamarans, do 8 days of sailing, 8 days total, 6 days of sailing, and we'd sail around to a number of different islands. That's a look at the catamaran. That's Keegan Rice again in his other location as a boat operator. But we teach everybody to sail. We'd stop at a number of different places. This is the baths, and we can stop just about anywhere we want. We'd swim off the boat. We'd bring musical instruments. Most of the boys would sleep up on the top of the boat at night, not in the cabins. You can see the water is just crystal clear, and the sailing is just spectacular. Again, the water. Total cost for a trip like that, again, about $1,700 a piece. The airfare was $550. A boat charter per person is pretty cheap. You get the larger boats, you put a lot of people on it, and you do all your own food cooking on it, and it works out great. Here we are sitting around and playing cards. You disconnect. There's not a lot of Wi-Fi down in that part of the world. So in August of 2014, we decided to do a world-class rafting trip. And so we traveled from New York to Africa. We did it by going through Johannesburg and then connecting into Livingstone in Zambia. Livingstone is the home of Victoria Falls, one of the largest waterfalls in the world. There we were picked up by our outfitter, which is a company called Water by Nature, one of the largest rafting companies in the world, run by a man named Hamish McMaster, an extraordinarily New Zealander. And he's been running rafting trips all around the world for many years, and he was personally coming on this trip with us. We got put into our hotel. We did a little sightseeing, a little sunset cruise on the Victoria Lake, and then we got everybody geared up and put into the rafts the next day. And we had 5 guides with us for our group. We also had a photographer and a couple of lead safety canoes. We got up onto the rapids, which started just below Victoria Falls, and we were given a quick training session how to handle ourselves in the rapids. Most of the hard work of steering is done by the guides. We were just paddlers to make the boat go faster or slower as the guide asked us. We were going through class 4 and 5 rapids, and we spent 5 days and 4 nights on the river. We would camp right by the beach at night. The crew would cook up wonderful meals that they would serve to us, and a lot of the boys just strung up in hammocks. It's very dry that time of year, and you got to fall asleep watching the extraordinary stars in the African sky, and the roar of the river next to you. We would also come across a lot of little villages. We would stop and talk to the locals. We also had some time on rapids that we had to portage around. On one series of rapids, we were coming through, and we actually flipped one of the rafts with a lot of the scouts in it, and it got flipped over, and we had to get them out before they floated down more than about half a mile, where we were going through a class 6, which is an unnavigable small waterfall, and we got them all out, and we also got it all on film. We used that film as a recruiting film for our Cub Scouts. Never fails. After spending a week on the river, got all the way down, and the only way to get out of the Zambezi is by helicopter. So we had 2 helicopters come down and pick us up, and they flew back up the river, literally 20 feet off the river, with the doors fully open, buckled in tight, but would fly right up all the way up the river, 60 miles, back up to Victoria Falls, and then up over the falls so we could get a close look out at the falls. And then they would land us back at a hotel on top of a mountain. We had a great trip on the river, and then because we were in Africa, we coupled that with a trip with a safari to Botswana. So we got on our group bus and went over the border to Botswana and did a 3-day safari looking for and finding elephants and lions and a lot of different animals. From there, we got bused back and flew back the reverse situation back to the States. This is another trip where the only 2 things you really need to do is set up the trip with the outfitter, Water by Nature and Hamish McMaster. You can see them online. And then our airfare was taken care of, again, by Chris Patrick, who was our charter operator. Once that's done, other than some visas, the trip's ready to go. So in 2018, we traveled to the island of Roatan off the coast of Honduras for a scuba trip. We had a number of folks in our troop that were already scuba certified, but we wanted to get everybody scuba certified. So we set up a program with a dive shop down there, and they sent us the online material to do ahead of time. And then we flew into Roatan, which is a very safe island off the coast of Honduras. Honduras is not the place you really want to go. You want to go to Roatan. So we flew into Roatan, and we then got a bus over to our hotel called the Bananarama, which is a wonderful little spot right on the beach. Once you get there, you take off your shoes. You don't need to wear them the rest of the week. Inside the Bananarama is a PADI 5-star dive shop. And so everything is linked together, and they gave us an incredibly good deal because we had a large group of people, about 20. And so we got everybody into the hotel, and the hotel has a big restaurant outside right on the beach and a bar. You're right on the beach to watch the sunrises and sunsets every morning. The people that needed to get certified then spent the next couple of days getting certified. Those of us that already were could start diving. Roatan has a dive area of about 200 dive sites on a reef right around the island, so you never run out of dive sites. Once everybody got certified by Monday or Tuesday, we would go out and we would dive twice a day, once in the morning, once in the afternoon. When we got to the end of the week, we did some special dives. We did a night dive where at 9 o'clock at night we went down under the water and out into the reef with our instructors, and we had underwater torches, and we navigated out through the reef underwater using compasses and torches. And then when we got out there, the instructors told us to turn off the torches, and we came back navigating just with the bioluminescence all the way back into the beach and to finally arrive on the coastline again. It was a pretty surreal night, and it's the type of thing that the Navy SEALs do in their training courses. The next day we did a shark dive where we went to a special shark area where they chum the sharks, and we had about 20 or 25 sharks swimming around with us down at about 70 feet, and we got some great pictures of that. This is a great trip. The total trip was about $1,700 round trip, and we got to spend a week on the beach, a week diving, and a week exploring around Honduras, including little zip lines and some jungle adventures. So it's a great trip, and the Bananarama is your contact in your hotel for both the diving and everything else, and Chris Patrick, our wholesaler, is the guy who sets up the actual charter space. So it's a great trip. Give it a try. In 2016, we decided to go sailing through the Greek islands. This is a trip we started talking about 2 years before. And so we took 30 of our troop, and we flew from Boston through London to Athens. And then we spent 2 days in Athens touring around the Greek museums and the Acropolis. We stayed at a wonderful place called the Dorian Inn, which is a hotel I've stayed at a couple of times. It's right in the center of Athens, and on the top is a wonderful rooftop restaurant and swimming pool. And so when you're at the top of the building, you get to see all of Athens, and especially at night, it's just a magical place to be having dinner. It's a very cheap hotel. It's a standard hotel with rooms. We put 4 scouts in a room, and each room had its own bath, and it's a very clean hotel, and we spent 2 days touring around Athens. We then went down to the yacht haven where the boats were with Dream Yacht Charters, and we picked up 3 yachts that we sailed for 7 days. And that sailing was quite something because the wind was quite strong, but the weather was perfect. One night we actually sailed all night long to an island where we got in at about 4 in the morning, and we were able to find the island by seeing the lighthouse 30 miles away looming in the distance. These are the types of nights that you remember the rest of your life. We had captains that we put on each of the boat. We hired the captains. They're quite cheap. And because they had all the local knowledge, and also they were able to get us primary and premier dockside berths at some of the islands. So the island of Mykonos, which is a very jet-set island, normally if you were to sail in there, you would be offshore probably half a mile and have to dinghy in or come in by launch. We were able to get right up on the pier. You can always hire captains to run your boats, and we do that almost everywhere we go, even though we are able to actually do the sailing ourselves. When we came back, we spent 2 days in Athens again, and then we flew home. The cost of that trip in total was $2,600. That was broken down with $850 for flights, about $1,000 a person for a boat, and $750 for everything else on the trip. So that's 11 days for $2,600, and it is a really worthwhile trip. So in almost all of our trips, what we try and do is get charter airfare rates, and we do that by booking group space on regularly scheduled airlines. And the way to do that, and the way I've done it for many years now, is to call a guy by the name of Chris Patrick, who is a wholesale charter operator. And what he does is I just tell him where we want to go and when we want to go, and he looks around for the best airfares and gets group space. What that means is that once he's allocated the space, say you want to take 20 people, he will find 20 seats all together on a particularly regularly scheduled airline that will go from whatever airport you need to wherever you want to go. If it has connections, he'll set those up as well. And then he will charge $100 a seat up front to hold that reservation. And typically on most airlines you can hold that reservation up until 90 days before you're planning to depart, just by laying out only that $100. If on day 91 before you depart you want to cancel the whole thing, you get all your money back. So it's particularly good if, for a cash planning point of view, that you can get your airfare and airspace locked in with the price 9 months, a year ahead of time oftentimes, and not have to pay anything more than $100 out of pocket, all of which is refundable. And you can reduce the airfare, you can reduce the number that you want by 2 or 3 or even more depending on the charter operation. So Chris is really good at this. He's been doing it for years. He charges anywhere between $50 and $75 service fee per ticket. So you got to add that into your pricing. But it's well worth it because it all gets set up. He handles all the pricing and ticketing, gets all the seats, and makes sure that you're all set for the day of your departure. Anytime you're traveling with 20 people, you want to do it in a way where there are no mistakes, because that's a real problem with 20 people if you miss a flight. And he'll also advise on connections. And so he's my first phone call every time I start setting these up. You typically cannot book air flights more than 300 days in advance because they don't issue their pricing until then. But as soon as they do issue the pricing, you want to start looking around. And you may be able to get a cheaper price buying a single ticket to that same destination on that same flight, but you won't be able to get it for 20 or 30. And so the group is usually the best way to go, and it's the best on cash flow. So that's a lot of our trips that we've done. We also did a trip to Cuba, but I'm not going to talk about that since you can't go there anymore. That was briefly, but we were the first scout troop in the country to be able to go back to Cuba after 50 years, and that was a fabulous trip as well. These trips are a lot easier to plan than you might suspect. I've given you kind of a summary in this podcast. If you have an interest in going further, feel free to send me an email at Brad Mead, BRADMEAD at deltanow.com, DELTANOW.com, or give me a call at 860-614-1484. Thank you.